Hello, this is Pastor Ed Ray Santos thanking you for tuning in once again. I want to start this message with a question. What is or where did you go for your favorite vacation? When did you go to that vacation? Was it recent or long ago? But most importantly, the real question is, how did you even start planning it? What entailed or what went into the planning process? First and foremost, the idea to go to a certain location came into your head because maybe you thought of the beach, or you thought that I've never seen the pyramids in Egypt, or it would be nice to take the family to Disneyland or Disney World. Where did you go for your favorite vacation? Then, how did you set the time or set a period of time apart for this vacation? Because that is the main theme that I want to look at today. What does it mean to set apart a certain time so you can have a special day or weeks or perhaps a pretty long time, like a month, to go on vacation? That's one of the first things you have to do is to 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 plan for a vacation. You have to block out a certain time period, so that way you have enough time to prepare for it. You can tell your boss or your job that you need to take vacation leave, right? And then you need to look for plane tickets and hotel accommodations, or perhaps you're staying at a resort or at a friend's house. So you need to give your friend a heads up. It's always good to plan ahead, but there is intentionality when you set a certain time apart for this vacation. Intentionality where you have to really put your mind and effort, action, as well as money into this time that you have set apart for a vacation. And to set something apart, that's the same idea of holiness. Our message today is called To Be Holy, and it is part 2 of our Sabbath series. To be holy comes from, and this is our key text today, it comes from 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 15 through 16. I invite you to turn your Bibles with me there, and here's what Peter said. But just as he, God, who called you, is holy, so be holy in all you do. For it is written, be holy because I, your God, am holy. So what does this verse have anything to do with the fourth commandment, with the Sabbath commandment? So if we go back to Exodus chapter 20, verse 8 through 10, the verse reads as so: remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them. But he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. You may have caught it, that in this commandment, holy is mentioned a couple of times. It's mentioned in verse 11 that the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. So he consecrated it. He set it apart. But it's also mentioned that it's also mentioned in verse 8 that the Sabbath day, we should remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. This word holy that we see in this commandment, as well as our key text that we just read a few moments ago in 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 15 through 16, is this idea to set something apart. Just like how you were to block out a portion of your schedule to go on a vacation, you are intentionally setting apart a certain time for you and your family to enjoy together, to go away into a different place and make memories, build memories with each other. And so there's 3 things I want to focus on here today in this message called To Be Holy. The first point is that God wants us to keep the Sabbath day holy. He puts the commandment on us. He tells us that we have a responsibility to keep it holy. Number two, the second point is we see from what we just read in First Peter chapter 1, verse 15, is that God is holy. And that when we go into the Sabbath, we are ultimately spending time with God and we are made holy in that. And then the third point is that the Sabbath commandment ultimately is a preview of a heavenly relationship between us being with God for all eternity, to be holy. So let's go into this first point of how God puts the commandment onto us. He tells us to remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. Maybe your Bible says consecrate, and that's perfectly fine, because consecrate or holy or to set apart come from the same Hebrew word, which is kadesh or kodesh, depending how there's two ways from what I've seen, two ways that you can pronounce it. And so what I want to look at right now is, how is kodesh used in the Bible? First and foremost, it's used many times. And the definitions, depending on context of the story, it could be translated as, kodesh can be translated as holy, or to dedicate, to consecrate, or to set apart. So in 2 Samuel chapter 8:11, we see an example here of a person who is doing kodesh. King David dedicated, that's the word right there, that's kodesh. King David kodesh or dedicated them also to the Lord. What did he dedicate to the Lord? Well, all the plunder that he gathered from his victories of war. He dedicated these items to the Lord, along with the silver and the gold that he had dedicated from all of the nations which he had subdued. And so what did David do here? It tells us here that he has set apart or consecrated it. And so this idea of Kodesh tells us that Kodesh honors or glorifies someone else, right? Honors someone. In this case, who is he honoring? He's honoring God by telling God that I am victorious because of the blessings that you have bestowed upon myself and my army. We're victorious only because of your might. We're victorious because of your strength, O Lord. And so David, out of gratitude and thanksgiving in his heart, he dedicates this plunder, he kodesh this plunder unto the Lord. It's very opposite of what King Saul did, right? When King Saul took plunder, he took it for his own selfish gain. But what did David do? He recognized the victory was not by his strength, but by the strength of God. Here's another example of Kodesh. Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 5, which I believe you're familiar with. This one is an example of how God is the one performing the action of Kodesh. In Jeremiah 1:5, it said here, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I Kodesh, I set you apart so that you could be appointed as a prophet to all the nations. You see? And so this is an example of how God set apart a specific person. In this case, it's Jeremiah, who is set apart to be an appointed prophet to all the nations. So what's the example of Kodesh, or what's the lesson that we get in regard to Kodesh here? Well, God sets you and I apart for certain tasks, perhaps, for a certain purpose, for such a time as this. You might remember that Esther, one of the popular verses, or perhaps the most famous verse in Esther's, I think it's Esther 4, verse 14, where Mordecai told Esther that who knows, but you may have been set apart for such a time as this, in regard to her speaking on behalf of her people to King Xerxes. And that's another example of how God set apart Esther, set apart to carry out a certain task, to have a calling. And so Jeremiah here has a calling to be a prophet to the nations. And we know Jeremiah's story. He was very hesitant. If anything, he thought he was too young. In that same chapter, he told God, well, they're not going to listen to me, right? But God said, don't worry, because I have set you apart. And he's not just talking to Jeremiah, he's talking to you and me as well, because I have set you apart. I shall give you the strength like I gave to David. I shall give you the words to say. I shall give you the power to to go about in doing the work, the good work of sharing the gospel. Now, Genesis chapter 2, verse 3 is another example of Kodesh. And in this verse, it's once again God who is performing the action of Kodesh. And God blessed the seventh day, and he consecrated Kodesh. He consecrated it, or he made it holy, because on it he rested from all his work. And so, of course, Genesis chapter 2 is uh, is in reference to how he created everything in 6 days in Genesis chapter 1. And then on the seventh day, he looked at all of his creation and he thought it was very good. And then he rested on it. Now, what does that mean that God rested on it? Does that mean he got very tired? I don't think God gets very tired like you and me. I think God rested for two reasons. He wanted to see how good the work was. The work that he's not admiring it for himself and patting himself on the back. He's admiring it for the sake of, this is very good for my people to live in. See, his work of creation was never about self-gain. It was about creating something for his children. In this sense, Adam and Eve, our forefather and our foremother, right? And so he looked at it and he said, this is perfect for them. And that's why he rested. He wanted to I believe after he created Adam, he wanted to spend some time with Adam in that rest. So the first day where God spent with Adam, where Adam and God spent together, creator and creation, it was on the Sabbath day, is what we can conclude from that example. And then the other reason why God wanted to rest on that day was because he wanted to set an example for Adam. He wanted to set a special appointment, a special day. He cleared his calendar to say, hey, I want to be with you on this day. And so if you can also set aside on the sixth day, 6 days you shall work, but on the seventh day, I want you to set that aside for me. So you and I can go technically on a vacation, if you could look at it that way, using the analogy of vacation once again. And so in using that analogy of vacation, God is the one who makes the plan, right? There's someone in your family who makes the plan. It could be you, it could be your spouse, maybe it's your adult child who's making the plan for the entire family. And then everyone else gets to join in on those plans of going on vacation. So God makes the plan because he's the one that set the commandments. The fourth commandment, he said, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy, meaning set it apart. So all we have to do, he made the vacation plans. All we have to do is really clear out our calendar. But that's so easier said than done, isn't it? Because what ends up happening so many times is we just look at our day and we look at our week ahead and we say, oh, well, I don't really have time. And I think that's such a Western culture thing to say, that I just don't have time. We want things fast, right? We're always on the go. But that's the beauty of the Sabbath commandment. God saw the busyness and hectic world that we would live in the 6 days that we are working and living here on earth. He realized that we would need that permission to rest. And so he made it a commandment. Why? Because he knows it's important. Because if we just keep going and going and going, the stress builds up. The stress builds up. The tiredness just builds up until we crash and hit a wall, and then we're not good for anyone. We're not good. We're not good for helping our family. We're not good for our job. We're not good for anyone if we just crash. And so God, in his awesome wonder, in his infinite wisdom, saw this and saw the need where we would need to rest from the 6 days of labor. And so going back to this point of how we are commanded by God to keep it holy, ultimately, God commands you and I to consecrate or set apart the seventh day as a holy day for Him. He's the one making the vacation plan. All we need to do is set a time on our calendar. And we don't even have to worry about when that's going to be because He made it easy for us. He said it's going to be on the seventh day. So here's what I would like you to reflect on. The first 6 days are ultimately dedicated for this world. We work, we play, we do whatever is needed for our earthly life so we can live with good means on in this world. But on the seventh day, Saturday, it should be different from the other six. So it is clear we do not treat it like any of the other days of the week. It should truly be set apart. It's Kodesh. So God expects us to Kodesh the seventh day. It teaches us discipline. It teaches us how to organize our life. That's the beauty of this commandment. While all of the other commandments focuses on how we treat our parents and how we should not covet anything that our neighbor has, this one teaches us how to not just gather the people in our circle to come together to worship the Lord, but this also helps us plan with intentionality. And I think sometimes as people, we can just go by the what's the saying? By the seat of our pants. I don't know if I'm saying that saying correctly, but sometimes we just go and we don't have a set plan. And God wants us to be intentional on how we plan for things. And so we can plan our week so that way the seventh day it ends in worship of God. Which brings me to my second point, that the Sabbath rest is ultimately not one of legalism, or it's not one of us looking at the calendar and our watch and saying, oh no, tick tock, I need to clock in or clock out soon because Saturday is almost here, or I should say the Sabbath day is almost here. That's not what this is. Ultimately, the Sabbath rest is a rest in Jesus Christ. It's a rest in God. You may recall that Jesus once told his disciples, come to me, those who are weary, tired, and burdened, and I shall give you rest. That's where we find our rest. The true rest that we can get from this world, it's not a vacation, since we're talking about vacation. It's not going to Hawaii. It's not going to your favorite spot in the woods. The rest is ultimately in the arms of God. And that's why God gave us the seventh day commandment, is so we can find that rest in Him. By resting on the seventh day Sabbath, you are truly in God's presence. And that's where our key text comes back into play. So let me read this once again. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 15 through 16 says this, but just as He who called you is holy, so be holy in all you do, for it is written, be holy because I am holy. So the source of life, we have to remember this, is Jesus Christ, that Jesus created all things, right? That's what that's what John chapter 1 tells us, that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was and the Word was God, and the Word spoke, and all things were created, and then the Word became flesh. This is talking about Jesus Christ. And so Jesus is the creator of life. So then who knows what's best for you and me? It's Jesus. And so when you and I come into the Sabbath rest, ultimately that rest is not for us to just sit around and lounge and recline. It's to spend time with God. And as we spend time with God, as we spend time with Jesus, as we walk in the footsteps of Jesus, as I've mentioned in other sermons before, we start to behave like Jesus. We start to have His character, and we start to have His attitude, and our eyes start to see things in a wholesome way and not a worldly way. And so the Sabbath day is ultimately a time for us to find rejuvenation or healing for our soul. And we rob ourselves that when we cannot make the Kodesh, when we cannot set apart this day for ourselves. We rob ourselves of that goodness to spend time with God, to find healing for our soul. To best illustrate this, I just heard a story about how a challenger came up to this this world-renowned wood chopper, and I suppose this story took place years ago before machines were invented and could cut wood so easily. So there was this challenger who went up to this wood chopper and said, "I can chop more wood than you in a course of a work shift, in the course of 8 or 10 hours, right?" And so the expert wood chopper said, "Okay, well, let's go at it." And so the whistle was blown, and they started to chop wood. And this challenger kept on looking at this expert who was chopping wood, and he realized that this man took a lot of breaks, and he thought to himself, well, the challenger thought to himself that I'm going to easily win this, because this guy, he works for 45 minutes, sits for 15 minutes, and then repeats that. He's taking so many breaks. And so he's just proud of himself. The challenger is proud of himself, and he's just chopping on the wood and just breaking it down and making lots of logs, right? But at the end of it, he was surprised to see that the expert wood chopper, log chopper, had a larger pile than he. And so he was baffled by this, and he went to the expert wood chopper and said, wait, how did you have more wood than me? What did you do that I didn't do? Because when I looked at you, you were constantly on a regular basis resting. And so the expert wood chopper told him, well, yes, it's true. I intentionally rested to catch my breath and to rest my muscles for a few minutes. But what you also didn't see, in the process of my resting, I was sharpening my axe. And here you are, chopping all this wood through the course of an entire day, through the course of an entire shift, with a dull blade. But my blade was always sharp. And so that's the Sabbath day. It's that regular rest day out of the week where we can come to Jesus, and Jesus sharpens our axe. Of course, that axe is a metaphor for our life, a metaphor for our attitude, a metaphor for our stress, or our ability to handle stress. Our ability to stop and reflect and meditate and pray to Jesus and say, oh, okay, Lord, in these 6 days, here's how I experienced the week. And here's what I carry into the 7th day to share with you. And I share these burdens with you so you can help me with these burdens. Perhaps you're seeking an answer for a confusing situation. Well, take it to the Lord. And you have the Sabbath day to do that. And the beauty of it, the Sabbath day, 24 hours, you can choose your time and not rush anything with Jesus. It's a beautiful day. So don't look at this day as a day of oh no, it's the days of do's and don'ts. That's not what the Sabbath day is. I think verse 8 through verse 9, it's often misunderstood by many Christians, even those who keep the Sabbath, Adventists or Jews alike. We look at this and we read that 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God, and you shall not do any work on that day. And we often misunderstand this, thinking that the focus of Sabbath obedience is to not do any work, and any work would be seen as sin or breaking the commandment. But we're looking at it from a wrong way. That would be the wrong way of looking at it, because the correct way is God is asking us to put aside everything on the 7th day. Anything that we do regularly on the other 6 days, don't do that on the 7th day, so that way you can spend a very thoughtful time with Jesus. That's what it boils down to. A Sabbath rest in God. You don't want to keep going on in life. You don't want to continue living your life with a dull blade. You want a sharp blade, and Jesus can sharpen your blade. In other words, he can sharpen your wits. He can give you the wisdom that you seek. He can give you the rest that you need to catch your breath. He can give you the wisdom on how to understand your challenges and how to approach it with a very godly way and not a worldly way. Ultimately, by keeping the Sabbath day holy or by setting it apart, by doing Kodesh, the focus is not on you, but you're putting your focus on God, which in turn, when you come to God, you are made holy because only Jesus can make us holy in that regard. In regard to righteousness, he cleanses us of our sin. And so we learn more about God, we learn more about our life, we learn about how we need to continue on in our week through Jesus Christ, through the Sabbath. So my appeal to you today is use the Sabbath for that. Take the time to put aside the TV, electronics, or anything else that is worldly that can take your attention away from God, ultimately as well with from family, because we'll talk about that next week, about how we are to gather everyone within our circle to worship the Lord. But put away all of those things that you use during the course of the 6 days of your work. Put away those things. It might be the TV, it might be watching the news, it might be and news. If you watch the news, I don't know if you're like me, but it just stresses me out, especially the current political climate. I can find myself sometimes siding with one side of the politics, right? And that's wrong, because I have to remember the lesson that before there's a Republican and a Democrat, I am a Christian, right? And so put away those things that you do and use for the first 6 days. On the seventh day, consecrate it, make it special, treat it like a special holiday with your loved one, with the one that you love the most, with Jesus Christ. Here's how I want to end this message today. The Sabbath commandment, ultimately, what the Sabbath day gives us is a glimpse of heaven. It's a glimpse of heaven. You might wonder, how is it a glimpse of heaven? Well, it's because we're with Jesus. And what is heaven? Heaven is us being with Jesus for all eternity. And so the Sabbath commandment invites us to be with God on that special day without any rush. So ultimately, it's a glimpse or a preview of heaven for how we are to be with God. The Sabbath day helps prepare our hearts to be fixed towards Him and not on this world. So in closing, I want to end with this reading found in Revelation chapter 21, verse 3-7. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Look, God's dwelling place is now among His people, and He will dwell with them. They will be His people, and God Himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away." He who was seated on the throne said, "I am making everything new." Then he said, "Write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true." He said to me, "It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give water without cost from the spring of the water of life. Those who are victorious will inherit all this, and I will be their God, and they will be my children." So the Sabbath day gives us a glimpse, a preview of this glorious time when we will be together with God forevermore. But until then, until Jesus takes us to that wonderful heavenly place, let's at least enjoy the moment that we have here with our family and friends, and gathering them together on that Sabbath day to be with Jesus. That's my prayer for you today. Thank you for tuning in. Until next time, take care and God bless.